Journey IFC strives to create safe spaces to worship God. Know that you are welcome just as you are, regardless of religious background or lack thereof, skin color, political affiliation, sexuality, age, culture, or any other label you own or society throws on you. You are welcomed and celebrated here just as you are.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Susan, and I'm a
Susan.
Now that we're all centered and breathed, did you feel the oxygen level lower as we all breathed at one time? Okay. There's not enough air.
There's always enough.
Always enough. Yes.
Just like Chris.
Now I'm going to tell you a story. This is from Exodus 2, verses 1 through 10. Our first reading today comes from the book of Exodus in a time when the Pharaoh had ordered the Egyptians to kill all male babies born to the Hebrew people. Why don't I always get the ones about killing?
You're lucky like that.
There's a lot of killing in the Bible.
It's the Old Testament. Okay.
There's a lot of killing.
Today we will focus on the story of Miriam, the young sister who is unnamed in this story. Now a man from the house of Levi went and married a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a fine baby, she hid him for 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and plastered it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds on the bank of the river. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. The daughter of Pharaoh went down to bathe at the river, while her attendants walked beside the river. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her maid to bring it. When she opened it, she saw the child. He was crying, and she took pity on him. "This must be one of the Hebrews' children," she said. Then his sister said to the Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get you a nurse from the Hebrew woman to nurse the child for you?" Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Yes." So the child went and called the child's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child and nurse it for me, and I will give you your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed it. When the child grew up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses because, she said, "I drew him out of the water."
Susan, I'm sorry you always get the death.
I
You've got some difficult readings, so thank you for that. So like I said, today is our final Sunday of our She Persists series. And so throughout this series, we have taken a look at various women throughout the Hebrew Scriptures who have shaped our faith history in one way or another. So oftentimes these women have had to face pretty awful, extraordinary circumstances to survive and protect their people, even, to persist is what they're doing. So today's feature woman, Miriam, who you'll see with the tambourine here, she falls right in line with that. She's going to persist as well. So our story begins right after the story we read, I think, 2 weeks ago. You might remember Shiphrah and Puah, who were the two midwives who they were ordered to kill all of the male children as the Hebrew women had the babies right on the birth stool, and they refused. We had a midwife come. We had my friend Stephanie come. It was great.
Sorry.
The Holy Spirit, it's God. And so we talked about how they defied Pharaoh's orders and they wouldn't kill the children, but Pharaoh, that didn't really stop him, right? See, Pharaoh feared the Hebrew people, which is ironic because he was currently enslaving the Hebrew people. But he knew that if they got too many people, if they grew in numbers, they would actually grow in power and they could eventually overcome the Egyptians' power. And he just knew that it wouldn't be long until they realized that they had the numbers on their side and can overpower him and his authority. So the Pharaoh sent all of the adults to hard labor. This was enslavement. They were making the pyramids and stuff, I guess. And he told the Egyptian people to kill any baby boys that were born to the Hebrew families. Because he figured if he worked them to death or killed them before they could get to adulthood, that he could stomp out the Hebrew people before they became a bigger problem. So this is where our story begins today. A family fears this, and they're scared of what Pharaoh's orders are doing. And so this mother takes her infant and hides him away for 3 months. But eventually it becomes too hard to hide him. Can't imagine hiding a child. And so the mother takes the child and places him in a basket that she lined to make sure it would float, don't worry. And she set him afloat in the reeds of the Nile River. Her son was being ripped away from her in this moment, but it was all she could do to give him a chance at life. So, in this way, she's kind of subverting what Pharaoh's orders were. He said, take all the boys and drown them in the river. And what she does is this mother takes her child and puts him in the river to give him a chance at life. And this is where Miriam enters our story. We're told that the boy's sister, we're not sure what age he is, she watches from the side banks from a distance to see what was going to happen to the child. And although she goes unnamed, it does not say her name in this particular story. Scholars tend to call it Miriam because in later stories we hear that her name, the sister of Moses, is Miriam. But she stands at a distance and she just watches to see what's going to happen to her little brother, to see if he would survive. And then another woman enters our story, and this is the daughter of the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh's daughter goes out to bathe one day in the river, and when she goes out, she sees that there is a basket. She goes up to it, opens it, and probably a pretty big surprise, there's a baby in there. And it says that she takes pity on the little boy because she knows what's happened, probably. She knows what her father has ordered, the Pharaoh, and she realizes that this is a Hebrew child, and she takes pity on him when she sees his little baby face and hears his little baby cries. And something in her is softened, it seems. She's not angry towards him. She doesn't see this as the enemy. She just wants to care for him, despite knowing that her father wants him dead. So then Miriam conveniently stepped back into our story. She's been following all along. And she goes up and she offers to the Pharaoh's daughter, saying, hey, I can get a nurse to come and care for the child if you need that. And the Pharaoh's daughter agrees. And Miriam, who in her young age, of her great wisdom, goes and gets her mother to be the wet nurse for her own child, actually. So in this way, Miriam has subverted the social order yet again, and she's reunited her family under this guise of helping the Pharaoh's daughter. So Miriam's mother raises her own son, and she's even paid for it, which is interesting, because she's just doing what a mother does, but this means that she's being paid for work instead of having to be out doing hard day labor in the bonds of slavery. As you might know, this story eventually moves on, and the child is named Moses, and he goes on to lead the Hebrew people out of enslavement under the Egyptians. This young boy who is drifting along on the water, saved by the combined work of 3 women, Miriam, her mother, and the Pharaoh's daughter. One day he will liberate his people from the bonds of slavery. But it took 3 women to make this happen. But Moses, he eventually, he grows up. And he actually grows up under the privilege of being part of the Pharaoh's house, and he's even regarded as an Egyptian, although we know of his Hebrew descent. And Moses later in his life is affronted by the pain and suffering he sees of the Hebrew people. And he eventually goes against the Pharaoh and fights for liberation for his kin. But this does not come easy, of course, because we're told that Moses is not a skilled leader. He's slow in speech. And he even kills an Egyptian out of anger at one point and runs away for some time, and he needs some help. But don't worry, he gets the help. We're told that along with Moses, he has the help of his sister Miriam, who's been there all along, and their other brother Aaron, who are going to help him overcome his shortcomings. The story continues, you might remember, with some plagues and some diseases, and all of that is brought upon the Egyptians because it says the Pharaoh's heart has been hardened towards the Hebrew people that he's enslaved, these oppressed people. But eventually God helps Miriam, Aaron, and Moses lead their people out of Egypt, away from the bonds of slavery, away from the work that was killing them. And it's crazy to think the Hebrew people are enslaved for over 400 years. Can you imagine 400 years that they were enslaved under the Egyptians? It's all they've ever known. It's all it's woven into their society. They don't know another way. And now they're being led by Moses and Aaron and Miriam, all three of them, into this unknown set of circumstances that could easily kill them as well. So while they're running away from the Egyptians after all the plagues and stuff, of course, the Hebrew people are running and they reach the Red Sea and they must cross it to survive. And then Moses, and probably one of the most notable stories in the Hebrew Bible, he raises his staff and he slams it down and he parts the Red Sea and the sea is split in two and their people get to walk across on dry ground. 400 years though. It took them 400 years to get this liberation. The Hebrew people had to pick up everything they had, anything they could carry on their backs, and just trust that the seas would not overcome them and crush them, that their leaders would not lead them to their own demise. But in this moment, they finally make it across. And we're told that the Pharaoh's armies, as they follow, they actually are drowned in the waters that are no longer split, and it becomes this brutal ending to a brutal story. Sorry, Susan, a little more death. But now what? What do they do? They're on the other side of the river, the sea. What do they do now? What will they do now that they're free and there's a sea between them and a life that they used to know? Well, we're actually told what they do. They stop and they begin to sing. First we have Moses. He kind of does this long song that goes on and on. But then Miriam comes up and follows off with her song, which is kind of short. And I'll read this for you. It says, "Then the prophet Miriam," get that, the prophet Miriam, Aaron's sister. We've got to say it's a sister. Why do we have to do that? We're just called her prophet. "She took a tambourine in her hand, and all the women went out after her with tambourines and with dancing. And Miriam sang to them, 'Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and rider he has thrown into the sea.'" These words ring with such great depth to all of the Hebrew people. They're reminded of all of the suffering they've experienced for over 400 years as a society. But in this moment, they are alive. And some of the Egyptians are even thrown into the sea. It is a victory for them indeed. Yet again, the social order is turned on its head. It's been subverted yet again, and Miriam's song holds as the rallying cry of the oppressed that are now liberated from a life of pain and suffering. Miriam is even called a prophet. This woman who saved Moses from death when he was an infant, in the reeds and the water. This woman who helped lead alongside him all these years with her brothers. She is someone who has a direct line of communication with God. Miriam, therefore, has become an icon throughout the Hebrew traditions. She symbolizes the hard work of women in the fight for God's work in the world. And she symbolizes life despite awful circumstances. But it's interesting because it always seems to revolve around water. Some scholars say her name comes from a word that means rebellion or to rebel. I love that. That's cool. I'll take that. But some also say it comes from the word Mayan, which means waters. Miriam, Mayan, they're similar. We get it. No matter how we translate this or where we get this, we have to acknowledge that her story always seems to happen at, around, with water for some reason or another. And even in modern day Jewish Seder meals, which I've learned recently thanks to Natalie, they leave a cup of water out to honor Miriam and the long line of women who have helped the Hebrew people survive these dangerous waters. And all of this is intentional, right? Because the waters in the Hebrew scriptures, they're a sign of chaos, of the uncontrollable. You remember Genesis and the creation story, the waters of creation and how God had to control the waters, this chaos and that was surrounding all creation, and that they thought that there was water, and they thought the sky was also water, so it was a little bubble. It's not the case now, I don't think. But they saw water as this unknown, dangerous, unpredictable thing. Its force could give you life and help you grow and prosper, but this force could also kill you and wipe out all of your people. They heard, the stuff about the flood, all of that. They were terrified of the water. Water was unknown for them. There was one girl who stood on the shore, not scared of the water. Miriam, willing to step into the chaos of an already chaotic situation, She was surrounded by waters of oppression and pain and enslavement and suffering, and so she stepped into these waters and protected her own little infant brother, which eventually led to the freedom of all of her people. And then again, Miriam is right there next to her brother, leading a charge when they cross the Red Sea. The chaos is split open right in front of their eyes, and they walk across on dry land. And then Miriam leads them in a song with tambourines in hand. Horse and rider has been thrown into the sea. And throughout her story, Miriam is followed by waters. The Hebrew people find themselves stuck in the desert for 40 years. Not what they planned on, right? They thought they were going to be free and life was going to be good. But they're stuck in the desert for 40 years. Many of them grow weary, many die, never seeing this promised land of milk and honey that they were hoping for. But as they travel in these arid regions, Miriam sparks up water around them over and over again to provide for her people. It's a reminder that she has some kind of special power with water, with this chaotic element. And while her story has many great points, there comes a time when we see why her story is also one of persistence. She has persisted several times in the story we've heard today, but she has another one that really comes to mind that really bothers me that I want y'all to read. So in the book of Numbers, chapter 12, we come across the traveling Hebrew people who are out in the desert, wandering around, looking for the promised land. And tensions are growing high. People are getting angry. Many are saying, we preferred life in enslavement. It was better there. At least we had food. At least we had something to do. Here we're just wandering. This nomadic life isn't for us. So tensions are growing in the people, and tensions are growing between Moses and Miriam and Aaron, the siblings. And then we get to this story. So it says this: while they were at Hazeroth, Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman whom he had married. This was a big deal. Marrying outside of their culture was an issue for them, which problematic. Another day we'll talk about that. And they said, has the Lord spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also? Good point, right? Miriam was called a prophet. Let's remember that. And now the Lord heard it. Now the man Moses was very humble, more so than anyone else on the face of the earth. That's how humble he was. That is not what humble people say, I don't think. Suddenly the Lord said to Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, come out, you three, to the tent of meeting. So the three of them came out. Then the Lord came down in a pillar of cloud, which is really cool, and stood at the entrance of the tent and called Aaron and Miriam, and they both came forward. And he said, hear my words. When there are prophets among you, I, the Lord, make myself known to them in visions. I speak to them in dreams. Not so with my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. With him I speak face to face, clearly, not in riddles, and he beholds the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? And the anger of the Lord was kindled against them, and he departed. Notice I kept all the masculine language here because it was troubling. I didn't like this, so I was willing to keep that. When the cloud went away from over the tent, Miriam's skin had become diseased, as white as snow. And Aaron turned towards Miriam and saw that she was diseased. Then Aaron said to Moses, O my Lord, do not punish us for a sin that we have so foolishly committed. Do not let her be like one stillborn, whose flesh is half consumed when it comes out of its mother's womb. Back to those waters, those birth. That's interesting, right? And Moses cried to the Lord, saying, O God, please heal her. But the Lord said to Moses, if her father had but spit in her face, would she not bear the shame for 7 days? Let her be shut out of the camp for 7 days, and after that she may be brought in again. So Miriam was shut out of the camp for 7 days, and the people did not set out on the march until Miriam had been brought in again. After that, the people set out from Hazeroth and camped in the wilderness of Paran. As we can see from this story, Miriam was not always dealt great cards. After all the life-saving work she has done, the source of water and life that she has been for all of the Hebrew people, Miriam was struck with this skin disease, leprosy, whatever we want to call it. which then was attributed to this understanding that she was wrong for challenging Moses' authority. Although we nowadays would probably assume differently, at that culture, her skin condition was seen as some kind of flaw in her relationship with God, because this culture believed that your physical health and spiritual health mirrored one another. Troubling, but this is what they thought. Therefore, Miriam's punishment meant that she had lost favor with God. But you may be asking, what about Aaron?
Yeah.
Right? Where is he in this? Didn't he do the same thing? Why isn't he being punished in the same way? But this goes back to something we said our first week in the series with Eve, and Gail talked about the reverse engineering that's done in these stories. These stories have been handed down to us in a way that often is trying to legitimate one person or belief over another. I would like to call that biblical propaganda, if you will. So this story has been used to downplay Miriam's role as a leader, and it hoists up Moses to the top. You can see how this is troubling for women leaders today. This is trying to put a flaw in this great leader that has done so many great things. Despite all of the stuff she has done to keep Moses alive, she is punished. Moses, Aaron, and Miriam were all equal leaders in the eyes of the Hebrew people. In fact, it took the leadership skills of all three of them to help Moses be successful. He could not do the work without them. Yet in this story, we see something that rings true to this day. It is much harder for women and other minority peoples to be leaders because they're often treated worse than their privileged counterparts. And did Miriam know this was going to happen to her? As Miriam sang and played her tambourines and got the whole community to join with her, did she know the pain that she would one day suffer? This affliction, this disease of the skin? Did she realize that although they had survived the chaotic waters, another time, as she stood there on the bank, did she realize that one day she would need healing waters herself? As a woman, maybe she was prepared to face this type of oppression, even in the midst of her own liberation. And isn't this true for people today? Women and minorities alike, who do amazing work and lead amazing lives, yet find themselves beaten down for challenging authority. Just look at our churches, our government, our homes. This is still true today. And yet this is why we need to read stories like Miriam and Esther and Jael and all these other women that we've talked about in this series. We need to be reminded that women have been leading from the beginning, and that their stories of persistence, they have value, and they can teach us something, and they can speak to the hearts of all of us, not just women. All of us can learn from this persistence. They also teach us that it's not going to be easy to do this work. And we can see this through all of their stories, all the pain, the death, the suffering they go through. But they do remind us that the work is worth it. When we tell stories about women, especially in religious settings these days, we are reminding one another that our narrative is far more inclusive than some people make it out to be. Because without Miriam, we would not have Moses. I actually found an article by a man named Stephen Crippen, who works at St. Andrew's Episcopal Church in Burke, Virginia. And I wanted to share this quote. It's a little meaty, but I'll share it all with you. He said this: "The Lord has triumphed gloriously," she sings, leading others in the song, celebrating liberation and life, a happy ending. But maybe even then, while she celebrates on the seashore, maybe even then she knows what you and I know about death, and sin, and evil, and suffering, and tombs. She must know. She had been a slave, a female slave at that. "Slavery is terrible for men," wrote the freed slave Harriet Jacobs in the 1860s, but it is far more terrible for women. And freedom from slavery was sometimes far more dangerous than the brutality of the plantations. But Miriam sings. Slowly, haltingly, then with more verve and power, they play that tambourine and they sing. They sing about impossible hope. I love that, impossible hope. About life trampling death. About joy and freedom and renewal and restoration and reconciliation and justice and peace. They still know all about tombs. Because like Miriam, like you, like me, they have seen death, and they will see it again. So the song of joy is not about the sudden arrival of a magical paradise, a heavenly playground where every single child and woman and man is safe and whole and nourished and secure. But this is what makes that tambourine so powerful. It helps us sing about life in the midst of death, about justice in the midst of injustice, about freedom in the midst of bondage. Today our call is to listen to the voices and stories of women and all of those who are oppressed and silenced and outcasted and othered, because those voices can help us see both our liberation and our simultaneous continued oppression. But today is also about celebration, right? Today is Journey's 18th birthday. We're excited about that. But we acknowledge that this comes in the midst of a war, and a pandemic, and all the regular struggles and pains of our normal lives. We, like Miriam, have survived a lot of hard things as a faith community, both in our 18 years and particularly in the past year. And there's a good chance, as we go into this next year, that we will face hardships yet again. But today we celebrate in the midst of all of it. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab some tambourines, and we're going to sing together, and we're going to play with our tambourines. And we're going to follow the leadership of Miriam and the many women that preceded and then followed her, knowing the pain of what we have left behind, knowing the suffering that is one day to come in the future, but all while honoring the celebration of what is now. We have survived. We are safe. And this imperfect journey has brought us to a place of rejoicing and song. Therefore, let us celebrate with Miriam. Amen.
Here we are at the end of our worship together. Know this. Even when it doesn't look like a plan, somehow there always is. 18 years have come to today. But it's not just for Journey. The blessing is this. Move forward. Live life in the moment. And always realize there's always someone watching your basket from the other side of the reeds. Go in peace. Amen.